Hey everybody, welcome to Every Other Friday Off. Today we'll be changing the oil on a Fiat 500 Abarth. Step 1, pop that hood. It's the giant red one with the big arrow. And open up that hood. Hey look, somebody shoved a whole engine under the hood, and it's only the size of a shoebox. Now I have a InGen intake. What this does is it takes extremely hot air, makes it hotter by blowing it over the engine, but adds 30 to 40 horsepower through the use of a cleverly placed sticker. Depending on what type of intake you have, and they're all about the same, you should have two little vacuum lines to pull off of the intake and get out of the way. Now what we need to get rid of is all this plumbing right near the turbo. Myself, I like to get rid of the entire intake, but your mileage may vary. If you don't already own a lot of universal joints for your socket set, run out and get them now. You're gonna need them. Most of my intake comes apart with a 10mm socket. 10mm socket. Look in your socket set. Look for the empty hole. That's where your 10mm should be, but never is. You'll find the next one at the store. For my InGen intake, that's tough to say. There are two nuts holding it down, one in the rear and one in the middle. One more large air line needs to be removed right near the air filter. My goofy air intake has some sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, air slide, air box, air sorta aim at the filter thing. Anyway, if you had the stock engine cover, not only does it come off a little easier than mine, which removes with 3 bolts, but you'd also have a kick-ass scorpion right on top of your engine. And there's one thing about Abarths that you need to know, always add more scorpion. Time to watch the fat man struggle. Now, even though it's right on top of the engine and you're oh so close, you really need to pull the air filter before you can actually pull the intake. And now a word about changing your oil yourself. As you can see on this thing, there are a ton of fiddly bits that need to come on and off the car just to change the oil, and we're not even there yet. If any of these little vacuum lines don't get reconnected or an electrical connector gets knocked as you're struggling with the small confines of the engine bay, the car's not going to run right. I don't trust the, let's be generous here and call them technicians at Jiffy Lube to even put oil back in the car, much less mess with all this nonsense. With the plumbing off, we can go ahead and, using our phone, dive on into the engine and take a look at the turbo goodness that lives inside. I'm not sure you'd see anything other than a major failure with this inspection, but still, it's cool to look at. It makes me feel good. So we're changing the oil, which is in the oil pan at the bottom of the engine. So why do we take the whole top of the engine off again? Oh yeah. We're after that guy right there with the black cap. There's your oil filter, conveniently protected by hiding it under everything. Now here's a trick. There's a little yellow sensor off to the left-hand side. You wouldn't think much of it until you go to try to pull that oil filter out of there. Go ahead and grab your lost 10mm socket and get that guy out of there. Otherwise, there's no way that cap and filter's coming out. When you've got the 10mm bolt removed, just tuck the sensor off to the side out of the way. But be sure you remember to put the thing back before you put the intake on. Otherwise, you'll be doing it all over again. Last job's up top for a minute. Go ahead and take your fill cap off and pop your dipstick. That'll help the oil drain better. Time to get underneath the Abarth. Now, the first thing we're going to have to do is remove the plastic skid plate. It's held on by easy-to-strip fasteners, and I don't trust Jiffy Lube at all to do this job. The skid plate's held on by 6 fasteners, and they're, you guessed it, 10mm.
2, 3, 4. Should be
Now the
5.
fasteners that hold the skid plate to the bottom of the car are mostly made out of rust, hope, and spit, so you gotta be a little bit gentle with them. Choose one of the back fasteners, or rearmost fasteners, to remove last. The skid plate kind of hangs off the front by 2 little tabs. Hey, you took the time to either jack up your car, shrink yourself into a noodle-thin man, or put your car on the lift. You're under here, so why not take a look at the stuff that keeps you safe? Ball joints and brakes. Those are two things that when they fail, you die. So have a look. Make sure everything looks okay. Let's look at our half shaft covers. Make sure that none of them are torn or ripped either. Go ahead and while you're under here, have a look for any drips, leaks, anything like that. Hey, I'm doing pretty good other than a little bit of rust. On my BMW, I have to make sure that it is leaking oil. If it ever stopped, I'm pretty sure it means I'm out of oil. It's a 13mm socket to get the drain plug off. It's aluminum, be careful. Time for the moment of truth. Let's see what this used oil looks like. Now, this oil's been used hard, 5,000 miles, and way too much racing by an inexperienced fat guy. I meant to get this oil out at about 3,000 miles, but life got in the way, and you know how it is, and, well, I'm not proud of what you're about to see here. And while that's draining out, I'll go ahead and use some compressed air to lightly blow out my dry filter. We can go ahead and put the drain plug back in and snug it up. That's just snug. It's an aluminum plug. Don't go nuts, Mungo. Time to get the oil filter out. Now for this next bit, you do want a drain pan under the car. And my rig includes a 27mm socket, a universal joint, and a very long extension. That's what you need to get down there to that cap. The cap's going to drag a little bit as you take it off. It's got an O-ring in it, so it's going to drag a good ways back, which is going to take forever when you're using a crazy rig like this. Remember when we took that yellow sensor off of the front? Well, that right there is why. Our replacement part number, at least for STP, is S9713. The old dirty filter pops out of the plastic filter housing. Go ahead and take a look between all the folds of the paper filter element. If you've got anything bad happening, especially metal chips and fragments, you might find them here. The replacement filter comes with an O-ring. Go ahead and dip your finger in some fresh oil and lubricate that bad boy. Use a screwdriver to pop that old O-ring off of the plastic housing, and then you can work your new rubber O-ring right on in its place. A little more lube, and then the new filter pops on with the spacer tabs going into the housing. We'll go ahead and refresh your Jenga skills to fish that filter through the maze and back into its hole. And now it's time for your 27mm socket and your universal joint and some hope and some prayer. This will drag on the way in, once again because of that O-ring, but it only goes just snug. Remember the yellow sensor. See the tab, see the hole? The sensor plugs into the tab, and you use your 10mm bolt that we took out earlier to hold the sensor back on. Time to put in the new oil. That's an important step. We're going to be using full synthetic 5-weight 40. If you did a good job draining, then 4 quarts is going to work just fine to get you all the way up to the full mark. But even though we know the capacity, and we're going to check it again after a hot start, go ahead and check your dipstick. Then it's time to go ahead and replace that 710 cap and the dipstick. Alright, let's put the intake back together. First, we plug back into the turbo, making sure that we have our split clamps already installed, and the intake goes back on the posts. I like to hook up all the plumbing, starting with that big air line, before bolting anything down. That way, I'm not pulling hard against anything. The 2 signal lines get plugged in towards the front of the intake, and the air filter gets replaced. So I'm going to tighten up all the pipe clamps now, and if you notice, I haven't tightened anything else on the intake down yet. I want to get all those seals made good now, before I tighten down other things that would move the seals out of position. Go ahead and replace the rest of the intake assembly. It's all held down once again with 10mm bolts. And more 10mm to hold down the intake itself. The skid plate goes on by hooking the little tabs over their corresponding tabs on the vehicle, and you lift up and button up one of the rear fasteners first. That'll let it hang nicely while you do the other 5. Moment of truth. Go ahead and fire it up. Make sure you've got oil pressure. One more check on the dipstick to make sure we've got enough oil. And yes. And one more step. Turn the key to the on position, not start. Pump the gas to the floor 3 times within 10 seconds, and you've reset your service life indicator. Thank you for watching. Hey, if overweight middle-aged men changing their own oil is the type of thing that you enjoy, how about hitting that like button? And a subscribe would really do it for me. It costs you nothing and makes me happy. I hope you enjoyed this video from Every Other Friday Off. Thanks for watching.